Ambassador Kalara Vex stood 7 feet tall with blue skin that looked like crystal. Her 4 arms moved with grace as she checked the files on her desk. She had lived for 300 years and had never once asked for a human bodyguard. The thought had never crossed her mind until today. The peace talks on Zerion Prime were different from anything she had handled before. The planet had been under attack for 6 months. The Corvin Syndicate had surrounded it with their massive war fleet. Millions of people were trapped inside the planet's shields, waiting to die. Every other diplomatic mission had failed badly. Some diplomats never came back at all. Kalara looked at the file again. Jake Morrison, age 32, former Marine, now worked as a private security contractor. The photo showed a man who barely reached 6 feet tall. He weighed less than most alien children. When she first saw his picture, she almost laughed. This small human was supposed to protect her from the most dangerous military force in the galaxy. The door to her office opened. Captain Nora Hayes walked in wearing her blue uniform. Nora was human too, but she commanded the diplomatic ship UCS Meridian. She had proven herself many times over the past 5 years. Kalara trusted her judgment completely. "The human arrives in 1 hour," Nora said. "Are you sure about this choice? The Zephyrian Council thinks you have lost your mind. They keep asking why you picked a human instead of a Corvin war beast or a Thalian battle mech." Kalara turned to face the captain. "Tell me something, Nora. When humans first joined the galactic community, what did everyone think of your species?" Nora smiled. "They thought we were weak, small. Our technology looked primitive compared to theirs. Most aliens saw us as nothing special. And now? Now they know better." Kalara nodded. "The Corvins think the same way those early aliens did. They see size and technology as everything. They cannot imagine that a small human with simple weapons could be dangerous. That blindness will be useful." The transport ship docked with the Meridian exactly on time. Kalara watched through the window as Jake Morrison walked down the boarding ramp. He moved like a cat, smooth and quiet. His eyes never stopped moving, taking in everything around him. Even in a safe place, he stayed alert. The other security personnel waited in the main bay. 3 Zephyrian guards stood together, their purple skin gleaming under the lights. Each one carried an energy rifle that could punch through solid steel. Their leader, Commander Dex Carlo, had cybernetic implants that made him faster than any normal being. 2 Alterian guards waited nearby. They were from Kalara's own species, with the same crystal blue skin and 4 arms. Their weapons could create force fields strong enough to stop plasma bolts. They had trained for decades in the finest military academies. Jake walked into the bay carrying a simple black bag. He wore basic military fatigues and boots that looked old but well-maintained. When the alien guards saw him, they started whispering to each other. Some of them pointed at his equipment and shook their heads. "Is this some kind of joke?" Commander Carlo asked. His translated voice sounded confused. "Where are his energy weapons? Where is his battle armor? He looks like he just walked out of a museum." Jake ignored the comments. He set his bag down and began checking his gear. Kalara watched as he pulled out what looked like an ancient rifle. The weapon was made of metal and plastic, with no glowing parts or energy cells. Next came a vest that appeared to be made of simple fabric. Then boxes of something the translator called bullets. The Zephyrian guard started laughing. One of them pointed at Jake's rifle and said something in his native language. The translation came through the speakers. "My child's toy is more advanced than that weapon." Jake looked up at the alien who had spoken. His face showed no anger or embarrassment. He simply stared at the guard until the laughter stopped. Then he went back to checking his equipment. Kalara walked over to Jake. "Ignore them," she said quietly. "They do not understand." "I am not here to make friends," Jake replied. His voice was calm and steady. "I am here to keep you alive. That is all that matters." Captain Nora called everyone to the briefing room. The main screen showed Xerion Prime surrounded by hundreds of Corvan ships. The war fleet looked like a metal cloud around the planet. Red lights marked the positions of siege platforms that had been firing on the planetary shields for months. The shields are down to 15%, Nora explained. They will fail within 24 hours. Once that happens, the Corvans will begin orbital bombardment. 8 million civilians will die. Commander Carlo studied the tactical display. What about military intervention? Surely the Galactic fleet can break through. 3 battle groups have tried, Nora said. The Corvan ships are too well defended. Their shields can absorb anything. We throw at them. Our only chance is to negotiate a ceasefire. One of the Alterian guards raised a concern. The Corvans have killed diplomats before. What makes this mission different? Kalara answered. This time we are not going in blind. We know their ship layouts. We know their security procedures. And we have something they do not expect. All eyes turned to Jake. He was still cleaning his rifle, running a cloth down the barrel with practiced movements. The alien guards looked puzzled. They could not understand how this small human with primitive weapons could make any difference. The Corvans respect strength, Kalara continued, but they only recognize certain kinds of strength. They see big weapons and heavy armor. They measure power by the energy output of your equipment. They have never learned to recognize the deadliest weapon in the galaxy. Which is? Commander Carlo asked. Jake looked up from his weapon. A human who has nothing left to lose. The briefing ended 30 minutes later. As everyone filed out of the room, Kalara stayed behind with Jake. She wanted to understand what she had gotten herself into. Tell me honestly, she said, can you really protect me against an entire Corvan war fleet? Jake shouldered his rifle and picked up his bag. Ma'am, I spent 8 years fighting in places where humans were outnumbered 100 to 1. I learned that the aliens who think they know everything about war are usually the easiest to kill. As the Meridian prepared to jump to hyperspace, Jake stood in the observation deck looking out at the stars. Soon they would face the most dangerous military force in known space. The Corvans had never lost a siege. Their technology was centuries ahead of most species. Their warriors were bred for war from birth. But Jake had advantages they would never see coming. He understood their weaknesses better than they did. He knew how their minds worked. Most importantly, he knew that in war, the side that adapts fastest usually wins. The stars stretched into lines as the ship entered hyperspace. In 6 hours, they would reach Xerion Prime. The real test was about to begin. The Corvan command ship looked like a floating city made of black metal and red lights. It stretched for miles in every direction, covered with weapons that could destroy entire planets. When the diplomatic shuttle approached, Jake counted at least 50 gun turrets tracking their movement. Each one could reduce their small ship to atoms in seconds. The docking bay was huge enough to hold a dozen ships their size. Corvan warriors lined the walls, their reptilian faces hidden behind combat masks. They stood 8 feet tall with thick armor that gleamed under the harsh lights. Energy weapons hung from their belts, humming with barely contained power. General Thak Morvex waited at the center of the bay. He was bigger than his soldiers, with cybernetic implants covering half his skull. Scars crossed his face like a map of old battles. When he moved, servos in his artificial limbs whirred softly. His vertical pupils fixed on the diplomatic party as they walked down the shuttle ramp. Jake stayed 2 steps behind Ambassador Kalara, his eyes moving constantly. He had studied the layout of Corvan ships during his military service. The docking bay had only 2 exits, both controlled by blast doors that could seal in seconds. Guard towers overlooked the entire space from 3 different angles. It was designed to trap visitors, not welcome them. Ambassador Vex, General Morvex said. His voice came through a translator device, turning his hissing speech into words they could understand. Welcome to my ship. I trust your journey was comfortable. Kalara nodded politely. Thank you for agreeing to these talks, General. The Galactic Council hopes we can reach a peaceful solution. The general's laugh sounded like metal scraping against stone. Peace is what the strong give to the weak when they feel generous. Today, I do not feel generous. Commander Carlo and the other alien guards shifted nervously. They had expected hostility, but the general's words carried real menace. Jake noticed how the Corvan soldiers moved closer, their hands resting on their weapons. The situation was already going wrong. Perhaps we should begin the negotiations, Kalara suggested. Time is important for everyone involved. General Morvex agreed and led them through the ship's corridors. The walls were lined with battle trophies taken from defeated enemies. Weapons, armor pieces, and flags from dozens of different species hung like decorations. The message was clear. This was what happened to those who opposed the Corvan Syndicate. The conference room sat deep inside the command ship, far from any escape routes. The table was made of polished black stone that reflected the red lighting. Chairs had been arranged for the diplomatic party, but they were clearly designed for beings much larger than most of the guests. Jake took his position in the corner of the room where he could see all the entrances. His rifle hung across his chest, and his hand rested casually near his sidearm. The Corvan guards watched him with amusement. To them, he looked like a child playing soldier. Ambassador Kalara began presenting the Galactic Council's terms. She offered trade agreements, technology exchanges, and territorial concessions. The terms were generous, far more than any defeated enemy usually received. But General Morvex listened with obvious boredom. "Your offers mean nothing," the general said, cutting her off mid-sentence. "Xerion Prime will fall within hours. Their shields are failing. Why should I accept scraps when I can take everything?" Ambassador Dex Carlo tried to speak. "The economic benefits alone would be worth more than simple conquest. The trade routes through this sector could make your people wealthy beyond imagination." Morvex turned his predatory gaze on the Zephyrian diplomat. "Wealth can be taken. It does not need to be negotiated." The tension in the room grew thicker with each exchange. The alien diplomats were used to dealing with civilized opponents who followed certain rules. The Corvans clearly had no interest in rules or civilization. They respected only strength and feared only superior force. Suddenly, alarms began screaming throughout the ship. Red lights flashed in the corridors outside the conference room. A Corvan lieutenant burst through the door, speaking rapidly in their native language. General Morvex listened to the report, his expression growing darker with each word. "It seems your people have made a mistake," Morvex said, rising from his chair. "Human ships have attacked our supply convoy. 3 of our vessels have been destroyed." Jake showed no reaction to the news. He had expected something like this might happen. Human military doctrine emphasized multiple approaches to any problem. While diplomacy worked on one level, other options remained ready. "I was not informed of any military action," Kalara said honestly. "The council promised that negotiations would proceed without interference." "Then your council lies," Morvex snarled. "Or your species cannot control its own warriors." The general walked around the table until he stood directly in front of Jake. Up close, the size difference was enormous. Morvex could have picked up the human with one hand. His cybernetic eye focused on Jake's face, scanning for signs of fear or weakness. "Tell me, little human," Morvex said, his voice dropping to a whisper. "What makes your people think they can fight the Corvan Syndicate? Your ships are tiny. Your weapons are weak. You have been in space for less than a century." Jake met the general's gaze without flinching. "I would not know, sir. I am just here to protect the ambassador." "Just a bodyguard?" Morvex laughed. "Look at you. You carry weapons that my ancestors would have used. Your armor would not stop a training bolt from our weakest guns. What exactly do you think you can protect her from?" The other Corvan officers in the room began to chuckle. They found the situation amusing. This small human with his primitive equipment thought he could stand against their advanced military technology. It was like watching a child challenge a grown warrior to combat. "Perhaps we should return to the negotiations," Kalara suggested, trying to redirect the conversation away from Jake. The attacks on your convoy were not authorized by the Council. We can discuss compensation. But General Morvex was not finished with the human. He had decided to make an example that would show everyone in the room the futility of opposing Corvan might. His warriors needed entertainment, and humiliating a human would provide that. I think our guests need to understand their position more clearly, Morvex announced. Guards, disarm this human. Show him what real weapons look like. The Corvan soldiers moved forward eagerly. They had been standing around looking intimidating for hours. Now they had a chance to demonstrate their superiority over the primitive newcomers to galactic society. Their energy weapons powered up with high-pitched whines. Ambassador Kalara started to protest. General, this man is under diplomatic protection. Any violence against him would violate galactic law. Galactic law is for those strong enough to enforce it, Morvex replied. Your bodyguard will not be harmed. We will simply show him how outclassed he is. The first Corvan guard reached out with a massive clawed hand. He moved slowly, confident that the small human could not possibly resist. His energy rifle hung ready at his side, charged and ready to fire if needed. The other guards spread out to surround Jake, cutting off any possible escape routes. Jake remained perfectly still as the alien hand approached his rifle. His breathing stayed calm and even. His expression showed no fear or anger. To the watching Corvans, he looked like he had already given up. Commander Carlo and the other alien diplomats watched nervously. They expected Jake to surrender his weapons without a fight. After all, what choice did he have? He was outnumbered and outgunned in the heart of an enemy warship. General Morvex smiled as his soldier's hand closed around the human's rifle. You see, this is the difference between a real warrior and a primitive savage. Strength always wins. The guard began to pull the rifle away from Jake's chest. For a moment, it seemed like the demonstration would end without incident. The human would be disarmed and humiliated, but no one would be seriously hurt. That was when Jake decided that the talking part of the mission was over. What happened next would change everything the Corvans thought they knew about humans, warfare, and the price of underestimating an enemy. In the space of a few seconds, General Morvex would learn why human bodyguards were becoming the most requested security personnel in the galaxy. The first sign of trouble was Jake's hand moving faster than anyone thought possible. The second sign was the Corvan guard's expression of surprise as 3 bullets punched through his chest armor. The third sign was the sound of grenades hitting the floor. Then the real fighting began. Jake moved like lightning. One moment he stood still as the Corvan guard reached for his rifle. The next moment, his sidearm was in his hand and firing. The ancient chemical projectiles punched through the alien's armor like it was made of paper. The guard dropped to the floor with a crash that shook the entire room. The other Corvan soldiers stood frozen for a critical second. They had never seen anyone move that fast. Their energy weapons needed time to charge before firing. Their training focused on long-range combat where they could use their superior technology. None of them expected close-quarters fighting with primitive kinetic weapons. Jake used that second of confusion to save his life. He dove behind an overturned chair as the remaining guards finally started shooting. Energy bolts sizzled through the air where he had been standing. The smell of ozone filled the room as plasma beams scorched the walls. But Jake was already moving. Again. 2 small objects flew through the air toward the clustered guards. General Morvex recognized them from historical files, fragmentation grenades, primitive explosive devices that no civilized military had used for centuries. The explosions in the confined space were deafening. The alien delegates threw themselves to the floor as shrapnel filled the air. The Corvan guards screamed as metal fragments found gaps in their energy-resistant armor. Their advanced technology protected them from plasma bolts and laser beams, but did nothing against simple flying metal. Through the smoke and chaos, Jake appeared like a ghost. His rifle barked repeatedly as he moved from cover to cover. Each shot was placed with surgical precision. He aimed for joints where armor plates met. He targeted weapon hands and communication devices. He turned the guards' size against them by making them easier to hit. The Corvins had trained to fight enemies who used similar weapons and tactics. They expected energy shields and return fire from cover positions. They were not prepared for an opponent who closed distance aggressively while laying down accurate fire with weapons they thought were obsolete. One guard tried to activate his personal shield generator. Jake put 2 rounds through the device before it could power up. Another attempted to call for backup on his communicator. A single bullet destroyed the equipment and sent the alien stumbling backward, clutching his wounded hand. General Morvex reached for his personal weapon, a massive energy cannon that could punch through starship armor. But Jake was already in motion, rolling across the floor as the general's shot vaporized a section of wall. The human came up firing, his bullets sparking off the general's cybernetic implants. The alien leader roared in pain and fury as projectiles cracked his artificial skull plating. Sparks flew from damaged circuits in his head. One bullet found the gap between his neck armor and helmet, drawing dark blood that splattered across his chest. More Corvin soldiers tried to enter the room through the main door. Jake had anticipated this. He pulled the pin on his last grenade and rolled it into the doorway. The explosion collapsed part of the ceiling, blocking the entrance with twisted metal and debris. In less than 3 minutes, the conference room fell silent, except for the groans of wounded aliens and the ringing in everyone's ears. Jake stood over General Morvex, who sat against the wall, clutching his damaged arm. The mighty Corvin leader stared up at the human with something that looked like terror in his reptilian eyes. "Now," Jake said calmly, ejecting an empty magazine and sliding in a fresh one, "I believe Ambassador Vex was trying to discuss terms." The other diplomatic delegates slowly picked themselves up from the floor. Commander Carlo's purple skin had gone pale with shock. The Alterian guards who had mocked Jake's primitive weapons now looked at him with new respect. Even Ambassador Kalara seemed stunned by the sudden violence. General Morvex tried to speak but could only wheeze. Damage to his cybernetic throat implant made his voice come out as static and hisses. Jake knelt down beside the wounded general and examined his injuries with professional efficiency. "You will live," Jake announced. "The bullets missed your major organs. Your cybernetics took most of the damage. You will need medical attention, but you are not dying today." Through the ship's communication system, alarms continued to blare. Jake could hear the sound of running footsteps in the corridors outside. More Corvin soldiers were coming, but they would have to blast through the debris blocking the door. That would take time. "Why?" General Morvex finally managed to ask. His damaged translator made his voice sound mechanical and broken. "Why did you not kill me?" Jake checked his remaining ammunition while he answered. "Dead generals cannot order their fleets to stand down. You are more useful alive than dead." Ambassador Kalara stepped forward carefully, avoiding the scattered debris and wounded guards. "General, perhaps we should reconsider the Council's offer. As you can see, underestimating humans can be dangerous." Morvex looked around the ruined conference room. His elite guards lay scattered across the floor, their advanced weapons useless against an opponent they had never learned to fight. The human had defeated them using equipment that belonged in a museum. It should have been impossible. "How?" the general whispered. "Your weapons are primitive. Your armor is weak. You should not have been able to defeat trained Corvin warriors." Jake reloaded his rifle and moved to a position where he could watch both entrances to the room. "Your soldiers trained to fight enemies who use the same tactics you do. Energy weapons at long range, shields and heavy armor, predictable battle formations." He pointed at the fallen guards. "They expected me to behave like every other species in the galaxy. Stand still and trade shots until someone's shields failed. Fight fair according to rules they understood." "But you did not fight fair," Morvex accused. "War is not fair," Jake replied. "It is about winning. You wanted to make an example of me to show your strength. Instead, you gave me an excuse to show mine." The sound of cutting tools could be heard from outside the blocked doorway. The Corvin rescue teams were working to break through the debris. Jake estimated he had maybe 10 minutes before they got inside. That should be enough time for what came next. "General," Ambassador Kalara said, "your fleet is still surrounding Xerion Prime. Millions of innocent people will die if the bombardment begins. Surely this demonstration has shown you that continuing this war may not be as easy as you thought." Morvex struggled to focus through his pain and damaged implants. Everything he thought he knew about human capabilities had just been proven wrong. If one human with primitive weapons could do this much damage, what could a full military force accomplish? "The reports," he said slowly. "The attacks on our supply convoy. How many humans were involved?" Jake smiled but did not answer. The truth was that only a dozen human operatives were scattered throughout the Corvin fleet. But he saw no reason to share that information. Let the general imagine hundreds or thousands of human infiltrators hiding on his ships. Outside the room, the cutting sounds grew louder. Soon the Corvin soldiers would break through and flood into the conference room. When that happened, the situation would become much more complicated. Jake needed the general to make a decision before then. "You have a choice," Jake said. "Order your fleet to stand down and negotiate in good faith, or spend the next few months hunting human saboteurs throughout your ships while your supply lines get picked apart." General Morvex closed his eyes and tried to think clearly. His cybernetic implants were malfunctioning, sending spikes of pain through his skull. But even through the agony, he could see the tactical situation clearly. The humans had changed the rules of engagement. They were not playing by the accepted conventions of galactic warfare. Traditional military thinking would not work against opponents who refused to follow traditional patterns. "If I agree to negotiate," the general asked, "what guarantee do I have that more humans will not attack my fleet?" Ambassador Kalara answered. "The Galactic Council will ensure that all human military activities cease during negotiations. But that offer is only valid if talks proceed in good faith." The cutting sounds stopped. Voices could be heard outside, as the rescue teams prepared to breach the blocked doorway. Jake moved to a better defensive position and checked his weapon one more time. If the general refused to cooperate, the real fighting would begin now. General Morvex opened his eyes and looked directly at Jake. In that moment, he made the decision that would save millions of lives and change the balance of power in the galaxy forever. "Stand down!" General Morvex called out weakly to his soldiers outside the room. His damaged voice translator made the words sound like static, but the command was clear enough. "Do not breach the door. Return to your stations." The cutting sounds stopped immediately. Confused voices could be heard through the debris as Corvin soldiers questioned the order. Some argued that their general might be under duress. Others pointed out that disobeying a direct command was treason. After several minutes of debate, the sounds of footsteps faded as the rescue teams withdrew. Jake lowered his rifle, but did not relax his guard. He had seen too many supposedly defeated enemies try one last desperate attack. The general's surrender could be real, or it could be a trick to buy time for reinforcements. Either way, staying alert was the key to staying alive. Ambassador Kalara moved carefully through the wreckage to kneel beside General Morvex. "You made the right choice, General. The Galactic Council's terms are generous. Your people will benefit far more from cooperation than conquest." Morvex laughed bitterly, then winced as the movement sent pain through his damaged implants. "My people will call me weak. They will say I surrendered to a single human with primitive weapons. Your people will call you smart," Jake said from his position by the door. "Smart enough to recognize when the tactical situation changed. Smart enough to adapt instead of getting more soldiers killed." The general studied Jake with his remaining functional eye. "Tell me something, human. Was this all planned? The attacks on our convoy, your presence here, this demonstration of your capabilities?" Jake considered the question carefully. The truth was complicated. Human military planners had prepared for multiple scenarios. but they could not have predicted exactly how events would unfold. The attack on the convoy was real, but it had been planned as a distraction rather than a rescue mission. Some of it was planned, Jake admitted. We knew the Corvins would underestimate human capabilities. We knew your warriors would be trained to fight certain types of enemies, but the specifics of what happened here were improvised. Improvised, Morvex repeated. Your people adapt quickly to changing situations. We have to, Jake replied. When you are smaller and weaker than your enemies, you learn to be smarter and faster. You learn to turn their strengths into weaknesses. Commander Carlo finally found his voice. The Zephyrian diplomat had been silent since the fighting ended, trying to process what he had witnessed. General, if you are willing to negotiate, we can begin immediate discussions about ceasefire terms. Morvex nodded slowly. Contact my fleet command. Tell them to suspend bombardment operations. All ships are to maintain defensive positions, but hold fire unless directly attacked. Ambassador Kalara activated her portable communicator and relayed the orders to the diplomatic ship. Within minutes, confirmation came back that Corvin siege platforms around Zerion Prime had gone silent. The planetary shields were still failing, but at least the bombardment had stopped. Good, Kalara said. Now we can discuss the specific terms. The Galactic Council proposes complete withdrawal of Corvin forces from the Zerion system in exchange for territorial concessions in the Outer Rim sectors. General Morvex struggled to focus on the negotiations despite his injuries. The pain from his damaged cybernetics made thinking difficult, but he forced himself to consider the proposal. The Outer Rim territories were valuable but not strategically critical. It was a fair exchange for ending a costly siege. What about war crime tribunals? The general asked. Several of my commanders used excessive force against civilian targets. Jake spoke up. That depends on how cooperative your people are going forward. The Galactic Council prefers justice to revenge, but they need to see real changes in Corvin military policy. The negotiations continued for 2 hours. Slowly, carefully, the terms of a ceasefire agreement took shape. Corvin forces would withdraw from occupied systems. In exchange, they would receive new trade agreements and technology-sharing arrangements. War crime trials would be limited to the worst offenders, with most officers receiving amnesty in exchange for their cooperation. During the discussions, Jake remained alert for signs of treachery. He monitored the ship's communication channels through his military-grade equipment. Several times he detected encrypted messages between General Morvex and his fleet commanders, but the conversations seemed focused on implementing the ceasefire, rather than planning attacks. Commander Carlo raised an important question. How do we know the Corvin fleet will honor these agreements once we leave this ship? What guarantee do we have that they will not resume attacks once the diplomatic party is safe? General Morvex looked directly at Jake when he answered, because now we know what humans are capable of. This one soldier defeated my best guards with weapons we thought were obsolete. If there are more like him scattered throughout my fleet, continuing this war would be suicide. The truth was that there were only 11 other human operatives hidden on various Corvin ships. But Jake saw no reason to correct the general's assumption. Fear could be just as effective as actual numbers when it came to changing enemy behavior. News of the ceasefire spread through both fleets quickly. On the human ships, crews celebrated the success of their covert mission. The dozen operatives had caused far more disruption than anyone had hoped. Supply convoys had been attacked, communication networks had been sabotaged, and key personnel had been eliminated or captured. More importantly, the psychological impact was devastating. Corvin soldiers who had thought themselves invincible were now jumping at shadows. Every maintenance tunnel could hide a human infiltrator. Every supply crate could contain explosives. The fear of the unknown was paralyzing their military effectiveness. On Zerion Prime, the population watched in amazement as the siege platforms powered down. For 6 months, they had lived under the constant threat of orbital bombardment. Children had been born in underground shelters, never seeing sunlight. Now, for the first time in half a year, people began to hope that they might survive. Ambassador Kalara completed the formal documentation, while General Morvex signed the agreements with his remaining functional hand. His cybernetic arm had been too damaged to use, but he managed to provide the required authorization codes for the fleet-wide stand-down order. "This is not over," the general warned as he finished signing. "My superiors will not be pleased with these terms. There will be those who call for my removal and a resumption of hostilities." Jake checked his equipment and prepared to leave. "Then you better make sure your people understand what they would be getting into. This was just one human with basic equipment. Imagine what a full military response would look like." The general's remaining eye widened as he considered the implications. Human military doctrine was clearly different from anything the Corvins had encountered before. If one soldier could cause this much damage, what could a battalion accomplish? What about a full division equipped with more advanced weapons? "How many of your people are already on my ships?" Morvex asked. Jake smiled but did not answer. Let the general spend the next few months wondering. Uncertainty was a weapon just, as effective as bullets or explosives. As long as the Corvans believed that human operatives could be anywhere, they would be cautious about breaking the ceasefire. The diplomatic party prepared to return to their shuttle. As they gathered their belongings, General Morvex struggled to his feet with help from his medical staff. Despite his injuries, he insisted on escorting them to the docking bay personally. "You have won this round, human," he said to Jake as they walked through the corridors. "But wars are not decided by single battles." "No," Jake agreed. "They are decided by who adapts fastest to changing conditions. Your people are learning that lesson the hard way." As they reached the docking bay, General Morvex turned to address the entire diplomatic party. "Tell your Galactic Council that the Corvin Syndicate will honor this agreement, but also tell them that we will be studying human tactics very carefully. Next time, we will be better prepared." Jake paused at the shuttle ramp and looked back at the wounded general. "General, there is something you should understand about humans. We never fight the same way twice. By the time you figure out how to counter our current tactics, we will have already moved on to something completely different." With that warning, the diplomatic party boarded their shuttle and departed the Corvin command ship. Behind them, they left a wounded enemy who was beginning to understand that the balance of power in the galaxy had just shifted in ways no one had anticipated. The news spread through the galaxy faster than light itself. Within hours of the diplomatic shuttle's return, every major news network was reporting the same incredible story. The siege of Xerion Prime had been broken not by massive fleets or superweapons, but by a single human bodyguard with primitive kinetic weapons. Ambassador Kalara sat in her office aboard the UCS Meridian, reviewing reports from intelligence sources throughout Corvin space. The psychological impact of Jake's actions was even greater than she had hoped. Corvin ship captains were reporting security breaches that turned out to be false alarms. Soldiers were seeing human infiltrators in every shadow. Captain Nora Hayes brought the latest updates. 3 more Corvin commanders have requested immediate transfers to safer postings. Their crews are refusing to conduct routine maintenance in isolated sections of their ships. Some vessels have actually withdrawn from forward positions without orders. Kalara nodded with satisfaction. Fear is spreading faster than facts. The Corvins know something happened, but they do not know how or why. That uncertainty is paralyzing them. Jake entered the office carrying his gear bag. He had cleaned and maintained all his equipment, preparing for whatever mission came next. His calm expression showed no sign of the violence he had unleashed just hours earlier. To look at him, no one would guess he had single-handedly changed the course of an interstellar war. "The Corvan fleet is already beginning to withdraw," Jake reported. "Long-range sensors show siege platforms moving to defensive positions. General Morvex is keeping his word about the ceasefire." Ambassador Kalara studied the tactical display on her desk screen. The red dots marking Corvin positions were slowly pulling back from Xerion Prime. For the first time in 6 months, civilian ships could approach the planet safely. Relief supplies were already being organized. "What about the general himself?" she asked. Will he be able to maintain control of his forces? Jake considered the question carefully. He is wounded, but not broken. The damage to his cybernetics will heal. More importantly, he understands what he is dealing with now. Fear will keep him in line better than any treaty. Commander Carlo entered the office looking shaken. The Zephyrian diplomat had barely spoken since witnessing the conference room battle. When he did speak, his voice lacked its usual confidence. Ambassador, I have received new orders from the Zephyrian High Council. They want to request human security personnel for all future diplomatic missions. They are willing to pay premium rates for human bodyguards. Kalara was not surprised. How many other species have made similar requests? 17 so far, Carlo replied. The Thalian Empire has offered exclusive contracts. The Rigel Consortium wants to hire an entire human security company. Even species that have been hostile to human expansion are suddenly interested in cooperation. Jake listened to the conversation with growing amusement. A few hours ago, most aliens had seen humans as primitive newcomers with inferior technology. Now, those same species were competing to hire human protection. Fear was indeed a powerful motivator. The communication system chimed with an incoming message from Earth. Admiral Lisa Wang appeared on the main screen, her uniform crisp despite the late hour in human space. Behind her, Jake could see the busy Operations Center of Human Defense Command. Congratulations on a successful mission, Admiral Wang said. The political impact has exceeded all projections. 3 different alien governments have formally requested military cooperation agreements in the past 4 hours. Ambassador Kalara smiled. The plan worked better than we hoped. How are the other operatives performing? All teams have completed their objectives, the Admiral reported. Corvin supply lines are in chaos. Their communication networks are compromised. Most importantly, their confidence in their own security has been shattered. Jake stepped forward. Ma'am, what are the orders for Phase 2? Admiral Wang's expression grew serious. There is no Phase 2. The Corvin leadership has agreed to full withdrawal from all occupied systems. They are also offering to negotiate broader peace agreements with the Galactic Council. The speed of the Corvin collapse surprised everyone. Military analysts had predicted months of fighting even with successful sabotage operations. Instead, the entire siege had crumbled in less than 12 hours. The psychological warfare had proven more effective than anyone had imagined. What changed their minds? Kalara asked. Intelligence intercepts suggest they believe we have hundreds of operatives throughout their fleet, Admiral Wang explained. They are pulling back to defensive positions while they hunt for infiltrators who mostly do not exist. Jake smiled at the irony. 12 humans had convinced the most powerful military force in the galaxy that they were facing a massive covert invasion. The Corvins were essentially defeating themselves through their own paranoia and fear. Reports continued to arrive throughout the day. Corvin forces were not just withdrawing from Zerion Prime, but from several other contested systems as well. Their military doctrine was based on overwhelming technological superiority. When that advantage was neutralized, they had no backup plan. Captain Hayes brought news from the planetary surface. The first relief ships have reached Zerion Prime. Medical supplies and food are being distributed to the population. The planetary government estimates it will take months to fully repair the damage, but the immediate crisis is over. 8 million lives had been saved by a handful of humans with old-fashioned weapons and new-fashioned thinking. The victory proved that raw technological power was less important than knowing how to use it effectively. As the diplomatic ship prepared to return to Galactic Council space, Jake stood on the observation deck watching the stars. Other crew members gave him a wide berth, unsure how to interact with someone who had become a legend in the space of a few hours. Ambassador Kalara found him there an hour later. How does it feel to be famous throughout the galaxy? Jake shrugged. Fame is dangerous in my line of work. The best bodyguards are the ones no one sees coming. That may no longer be possible, Kalara pointed out. Every species in the galaxy now knows what humans are capable of. Your element of surprise is gone. Not really, Jake replied. Today they learned about kinetic weapons and close-quarters combat. Tomorrow we might use cyber warfare or psychological operations. Humans adapt faster than our enemies can learn to counter us. The ship jumped to hyperspace, carrying news of humanity's first major victory in galactic politics. In the weeks that followed, the story of the human bodyguard would be told and retold across thousands of worlds. Each telling would add new details, making Jake seem larger and more dangerous than life. But the real impact was not in the stories themselves. It was in the change of perception they represented. Humans were no longer seen as weak newcomers struggling to find their place in galactic society. They were recognized as a force to be respected and, when necessary, feared. Military academies began studying human tactics. Diplomatic schools started requiring courses on human psychology. Trade agreements suddenly favored human colonies that had been ignored for decades. The balance of power in the galaxy had shifted, and everyone was scrambling to adapt. Jake Morrison returned to Earth as a hero, but he did not enjoy the attention. He preferred working in the shadows where his enemies could not see him coming. Within a month, he had taken a new assignment, protecting a human ambassador to the Rigel system. The mission briefing mentioned possible terrorist threats and political instability. Jake read through the files with professional interest. The aliens involved had probably studied the Xerion Prime incident and thought they knew how to counter human tactics. They were wrong, of course. But Jake looked forward to showing them just how wrong they were. The galaxy was learning that humans brought more than just technology and trade goods to interstellar society. They brought unpredictability, adaptability, and a willingness to fight dirty when the stakes were high enough. Most species found this combination either fascinating or terrifying. Jake Morrison did not particularly care which reaction he provoked. He had a job to do, and he was very good at his job. The aliens would learn to respect that one way or another. As his transport ship headed toward its next destination, Jake cleaned his rifle and prepared for whatever challenges awaited. Somewhere in the galaxy, an enemy was planning an attack on a human diplomat. They probably thought they were clever and well prepared. They would discover their mistake soon enough. Humans had a talent for turning other people's cleverness against them. It was one of their most useful skills in a galaxy full of species who thought they knew everything about warfare. The story of the human bodyguard was just beginning, and every chapter would teach the galaxy something new about what it meant to underestimate humanity.